Blessed be everybody, what's up? Bill Sheets here, craft name Mannun, and you are watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and out, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. It is awesome to see all of your witchy, happy, smiling faces once again. Today on this episode, we will be talking about the tools of a witch. These are some of the tools that I personally use, and many other Wiccans/witches that I run in circles with, and they are very special to us, and in fact, become part of us. A sort of extension, you can say, over time. This being said, roll that intro. Welcome back, everybody. So, as Wiccans and witches, like most other professions, so to speak, we too have certain tools and trinkets of the trade. These tools each have their own energies, correspondences, and uses within ritual and magical practice. The most common tools you will hear about are the Athame, Chalice, Wand, Sword, Pentacle, and sometimes staves. Even the more common suits of the tarot reflect pentacles, cups, wands, and swords. Each one of these is in turn associated with one of the four more common Western versions of the elementals: pentacles for earth, wands for fire, swords for air, and chalices for water. Although, in some cases, the swords will represent fire and wands air, depending on your deck and background. These tools that we will go over today are not to be taken lightly in the practice of Wicca or witchcraft. These are ultimately a direct connection and extension of yourself within ritual and other magical practices. Let me be very clear here. I don't mean you have to or should run out and purchase a bunch of expensive tools, as the glamour and fanciness has nothing to do with the power or energy that your specific tool will possess. I do, however, mean that you should spend some time and visit a few antique stores or craft-based stores, maybe a botanical or two if you have in your area. And of course, online stores nowadays are a dime a dozen, so things are quite accessible no matter where you live. Some of these tools that we will be discussing, in fact, are best if you make them yourself out of natural materials that you may hunt down in your local parks or maybe some forest or woods nearby. In a future episode, I will be teaching you how to make some of these tools from scratch, so keep an eye out for those. Regardless, these tools do not need to break the bank for you, and in fact can be quite inexpensive. As long as you make a connection with them is all that matters. Really, put the time, patience, and energy into selecting your working tools, as they will most likely be with you for a large majority, if not your entire career as a practitioner. Look for tools that jump out to you. If you have the good fortune of being able to hand pick your tools in person, touch the tool, hold it in your hand and feel its energies. Let it talk to you. How does it feel? What do you get from it? Does it feel good? Most important in the craft, it is said to never price haggle over magical tools. If you make a connection, then get it, if you can afford it. Otherwise, it wasn't meant to be. Move on. These are not things that need to be obtained overnight. Take your time. I spent a good year obtaining my first tools. Some of them I still have to this day. Others I've gifted away or put into retirement. Some of my tools I have in turn received as gifts. These types are some of my most cherished. After you have purchased or received your tools, it is most important to consecrate them. This is a magical technique utilized to purify and cleanse negative energies that can be attached to an item. People handling the item during manufacturing or even just the tool being handled by others over time can leave a negative residue on the item or tool that should be negated before you enchant the tool. I've included a link below and a little box up at the top to see a demonstration I've put together on how to consecrate items and tools. Once you have consecrated a tool, you should do something to it to enhance or change it a little bit. Whether you carve, engrave, or even just paint or write sigils, runes, or magical inscriptions that mean something to you on the tool, this will in effect make it your own and infuse this item with your energies and intent. So while you are inscribing the tools, you should be concentrating on how you plan to use this tool and what and how you expect it to serve you back. For instance, if you purchase or make a magic wand, when you are carving or inscribing magic symbols of your choice upon it, you should be thinking about how you will be using it in your circle and/or rituals, and keep this up in your mind while doing this. You should not be concentrating on the tasks at work tomorrow or how your boyfriend and girlfriend just dumped you and you can't wait for them to get theirs. So let's dive right in and go over some of these tools. And by the way, I'm not telling you that you need to have and utilize these tools in order to practice as a Wiccan/witch. Again, these are tools that I personally utilize in the tradition of the craft that I was taught and initiated into. Okay, the Athame. An Athame is a ceremonial blade used in Wicca and other pagan religions and ceremonial practices. It generally has a black handle and the blade is usually double-edged, though not always. This tool has influenced a wide range of practices, including ceremonial magic traditions, witchcraft, certain satanic traditions, and other popular neo-pagan traditions. In Wicca, the Athame is one of the most important tools to a witch. It is in fact one of the first tools most Wiccans are introduced to. Per your tradition, if you are part of a traditional coven or style of Wicca you choose to learn, each Athame may differ slightly in look, but they practically all serve the same purpose. This purpose is to direct energy into or towards an object, being, or circumstance. Also, the pronunciation here can be a little controversial. Some say Athame and some will say Athame, and I've even heard others say Atham or Athame. I call it an Athame. A little history on the Athame. An Arthame appears in some versions of the Key of Solomon, which is a grimoire from the Renaissance ages dating back to the 14th or 15th century Italian Renaissance. Gerald Gardner, the gentleman who resurrected witchcraft as we know it today, in his fictional book High Magic's Aid, he writes about the Athame and introduces it to the craft community in its form and use that still exist amongst pagans of all traditions and backgrounds today. In fact, Gerald had an extremely keen interest in weaponry, especially weaponry from Malaysia, where he even wrote a book called The Cree and Other Malay Weapons, published in 1936. Some believe this is why we utilize the Athame in witchcraft today, and why he incorporated its use during the revival he struck forth. The Athame is represented by the element of fire for most witches. For some, it is also represented by the element of air, though the latter is usually within ceremonial magic circles. Although the Athame is a knife, it is never to be used to cut anything physically, only magically. For instance, one may use an Athame to cut a doorway to temporarily leave an already cast magical circle. An Athame is also used to direct energy to form a magical circle, or to empower or enchant a magical item. Another use is to direct consecration or clearing energy into an object or circumstance to cleanse it of negative energies. Basically, everything you would think the magic wand does is usually carried out by the Athame in Wiccan practices. A lot of times, Athames are also used for a typical Wiccan practice called calling the quarters, where you hold your Athame in the air toward one of the 4 cardinal directions, drawing an invoking pentagram or elemental invoking pentagram, and then calling the beings, energies, and spirits of that direction to join your circle or occasion. This is typically called a salute and is done in honor, not defense or protection. Sort of like when you would see in the Middle Ages when swords would be drawn and placed above a king's head as they walked through the middle of them with honor. As I mentioned above, not all Athames look the same. In traditional practices like Gardnerian or Alexandrian, for instance, there are specific symbols that are drawn per that tradition. In eclectic circles, however, the symbols can be anything from astrological symbols to runes or glyphs. In some practices, the Athame is single-edged instead of double-edged. The double-edged is the most common practice for most Wiccans, as it carries symbolism of duality, for instance, masculine and feminine, positive and negative, good and evil, the typical dual nature of the universe. Another reason for the double edge is so that when drawing pentagrams and what have you, the blade magically cuts in both directions to inscribe. The reasoning of the black handle of the Athame is because the color black absorbs energy, so in essence, this black handle becomes a battery to store magical power raised over many circles and/or rituals. Some traditions of the craft, especially those quite fond and associated with the Fae, will forgo Athames altogether because of the iron in the blade. These traditions will either replace the Athame with a wand instead, or simply design an Athame with copper, stone, wooden, or bronze blade instead. Okay, Let's move on to the chalice. The chalice or cup is simply just that. It's a small-footed cup used to hold liquid, usually for consumption, and usually used ritually in many religions. Ritual chalices have been used for centuries throughout many religions and sacred rituals. One of the most famous chalices is that known as the Holy Grail, which is supposedly the cup that Jesus drank from at the Last Supper and became famous in Arthurian legends. A more recent depiction of the Holy Grail arises in the book and the movie The Da Vinci Code, where it is revealed ultimately that the Holy Grail is actually not a physical cup at all, but symbolism of a woman's womb itself, and that this Holy Grail gives the eternal life because the womb is the source of procreation and therefore eternal life will always come from it. This has in fact always been common knowledge for most of us pagans, and I for one was so gratified to see this concept released to the general masses around the world. Obviously in Wicca, the chalice is associated with the feminine and with the element of water, and represents in many traditions the womb of the goddess. The chalice is used ritually in Wicca as a cup to hold wine, usually red wine or other drink that will be utilized during a part of the ritual called cakes and wine or cakes and ale. And this is a small ritual which is very much like the Catholic Eucharist, where some wine and cakes or cookies are blessed and then partaken of by the practitioner or practitioners. The big difference being that we as Wiccans/witches do not partake of the blood and body of Christ. For us, it is simply good blessings baked into wonderful ingredients that we partake of freely and then share with other beings and spirits by offering some to them. Usually this is done by pouring a little of the wine and spreading some of the cakes and cookies onto the earth for consumption. In forms of more advanced magics, the chalice sometimes is also used as a means of fertility magic, and along with the Athame is symbolic of procreation. Some will even use their chalice to scry into. Your chalice can be made of metal, glass, or wood. Not all chalices on the market are made to be drank. You shouldn't drink from some chalices on the market today. So make sure whatever you go with for your chalice, it's safe to drink from. Again, to make it your own, you will want to consecrate and empower this vessel and inscribe personal symbols and representation upon it. Okay, let's move on to a pentacle. A pentacle is a disc made of wood, metal, or even wax that has a pentagram drawn or inscribed or etched onto its surface. Traditionally, this item was used by some magical practices as a sort of talisman for spirit evocation. We as Wiccans and witches will place these symbols on our altars and utilize them as a symbol of the element of earth, and a physical representation of the pentagram with its 5 points representing earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. Interesting fact. Pentacles have no connotation of 5 points, where throughout history the pentacle many times was actually inscribed with hexagrams, 6-pointed stars, and other symbols. It's very easy to confuse a pentacle with a pentagram, whereas the latter is a magical geometric design and a pentacle is actually an item, usually a disc of some sorts with geometric designs and or what have you inscribed or drawn upon it. Two very different things. So, in short term, a pentacle is just a magic talisman that can contain any number of designs, symbols, and or characters inscribed upon it. In many old grimoires, for instance the Lesser Key of Solomon, the pentacle was hung about the neck of a magician, who would then call upon spirits or demons to be present at his command. The pentacle was a form of protection and calling card for a particular being. Now I won't go too far into the pentagram itself, as this can get quite in depth and to be honest deserves an episode all to itself. I'll end up doing this in the near future. Many witches will wear a pentacle as jewelry, as it has become a major symbol of the craft. Other uses of the pentacle in many craft circles is to place objects onto the pentacle when purifying and charging them. If you happen to find yourself a nice pentacle and it contains other symbols than just a simple pentagram, it would be wise of you to look into just exactly what you're bringing home, as these symbols can take a pentacle in a whole different direction with energy that you may not have been expecting or be prepared for. This is another tool that you can easily create yourself. A disc of wood or circular piece of metal or even wax can be used. Obtain this blank piece of medium and simply draw your pentagram onto it, making it a pentacle. You can even customize it a little further with symbols that will further energize it to make it your own, or lean more towards the particular energy you wish for it to possess. Okay, moving on to a wand. A wand is usually carved out of wood, but can be crystal or even copper is a popular material in many magical forms today. If you do decide to carve a wand out of wood, it is best that you find a branch that has already fallen from a tree. Don't cut it off the tree if you can help it. If you do cut a branch from a particular tree, 2 things. 1, make sure that the tree isn't protected by your local government. For instance, many oak trees are protected and you cannot legally molest them in any way. 2, make sure you thank the tree for its sacrifice and be sure to leave something of yourself at the base of the tree, be it a crystal or a gift of some sorts like that, making sure it is environmental. Your best bet is to just find a good stick or branch that's already left the tree by natural causes. If you're lucky enough to find a branch that was struck by lightning, good goddess, grab that branch and all of the branches that fell with it. This is extremely rare and makes for very, very powerful wands and staves. Wands are usually attached to the element of fire, but sometimes air, and they contain masculine energy. You can adorn your wand with crystals and many other magical trinkets you may acquire. The use of the wand for the most part is the same uses as the Athames consist of, which is to direct energy to form a magical circle or to empower, enchant, or consecrate a magical item. Throughout ancient grimoires, wands have been utilized often, and even in more ceremonial branches of the occult. For instance, the Golden Dawn system of magic utilizes specialized wands like the Lotus Wand, the Caduceus, or the Staff of Karax. And as I mentioned earlier, many more Fae-based Wiccan and witchcraft traditions will use the wand instead of an Athame because of the belief of the Fae being afraid of iron. Okay, next up is the Censer and or Thurible. Now these are 2 different objects in fact that usually get lumped together and labeled the same thing. A censer is an ornate container used to burn incense and has a handle on it so that it can be moved from place to place or just sat down on an altar, for instance. A Thurible is a censer, but it is attached to chains so that it can be swung back and forth to sense areas, peoples, and things in an environment. Sometimes Thuribles will have no base and must constantly be suspended by the chains attached and hanging it on a post of some kind, unlike a censer that usually contains a handle of sorts. Wiccans and witches use both censers and Thuribles, and sometimes a combination of both. It just depends on that person's or coven's liking and preference. When using a censer, you must use these with a charcoal, and then you would sprinkle a raw incense upon the charcoal. This incense can be a predetermined store-bought incense or something you can put together yourself, provided you have the resins and herbs to do so. Many witches prefer to collect their own resins and herbs and make their own concoctions and recipes to suit the ritual or celebration at hand. Censers in the craft are used to sense the circle itself, participants within the circle, and objects and tools within a magical circle, especially those being purified and consecrated. In ancient practices, and even some practices today, it was believed that incense smoke carried prayers to the gods. Most pagan practices today utilize the censer for purification purposes. And because a ritual just isn't a ritual without the essence of sweet-smelling resins hanging in the air along with the smoky atmosphere and the candle's flames dancing through the subtle fog of creativity and magic. That brings us full circle back to the blades of the craft. Now another common tool found in many traditions in Wiccan circles is a sword. This is relatively a simple one to break down because it has all of the same traits and functionality as the Athame, only it's much bigger, and usually used in coven practice as opposed to solitaire practice, even though there's absolutely no restrictions on the latter using a sword. For the most part though, a sword is usually just used to construct the magic circle, and the Athame is used for everything else. Also, the sword too is most commonly double-edged. However, it is not required to have a black handle like the Athame. Next is the Bolline and the white-handled knife. Like the Censer and Thurible, a lot of Wiccans and witches lump these 2 tools together as the same thing. Again, they are not, and like the Censer and Thurible, the only difference is the way they look and the basic functionality. The white-handled knife in the craft, unlike the Athame, is used to cut, carve, and inscribe all things physically. So, you have a piece of string that needs to be cut to size and circle? Use the white-handled knife. You have a candle that needs to be inscribed? Use the white-handled knife. You have a small smidgen of hair to cut for a spell? use the white-handled knife. Like all the other tools, the white-handled knife also needs to be cleansed and consecrated and even personalized and enchanted or empowered, as I discussed earlier with the other tools. The white-handled knife obviously is required to have a white handle, but unlike the Athame, the blade can be single-edged. The white-handled knife can be seen as the magical utilitarian tool within the craft. So what is a Bolline then? A Bolline is the same exact thing as the white-handled knife. The only difference is the blade is curved like a sickle so that cutting herbs and whatnot is a little easier and safer. Either one of these can be substituted for the other, or you can have both. Up to you. Like the Athame, the white-handled knife and Bolline both are ruled by air or fire. Okay, the Book of Shadows. Any witch worth his or her weight in the purest of herbs and essential oils keeps a Book of Shadows, whether it be personal and or coven-based. A Book of Shadows, BOS for short, is simply a book that is kept by a practitioner to record their rituals, spells, learnings, and any other magical information they desire to write down into it. The key word is magical. The BOS is not a personal diary. Many of these grimoires give instruction on rituals and spells and other magical knowledge, just like your BOS would too if someone found it or you lent it over for use by another. Which, I do not recommend you ever let your BOS out of your hands, ever. If need be, and you want a friend to have some information from your BOS, then let them copy that particular spell or ritual from your book to theirs. Hand copy. None of this copy machine crap. If they want it, let them copy it by hand. It is much more magical this way, and it's also very traditional through the centuries. They will also appreciate it more in this manner than a quick fix and a toodaloo. It's wise to create your BOS in a 3-ring binder system or similar, so that you can easily rearrange, add, or take away as needed. If you have a BOS that is set in a binder with glued edges, you no longer have this option, at least to a degree of some kind of logical neatness. Like your altar is the workbench of your magical practice, as discussed in Sacred Places and Altars linked above, your BOS is your blueprints and designs for your magical practice. Without them, you are, as far as I'm concerned, lost in the woods. The next few things are not necessarily tools of a witch, but definitely deserve an honorable mention because they are used in the craft just as much as the others mentioned above, if not more so even, and a circle or ritual just wouldn't be the same, in my opinion, without them. First, candle holders and candles. I like to use taper candles on my altar and cylinder glass candles for my quarters myself, but you can use whatever you like. I recommend something that will at least burn the duration of your working or celebration. The colors are up to you. However, these are the standard usual colors used, and for what? Green in the north, yellow in the east, red in the south, blue in the west, green, white, or gold for the god candle, green, white, or silver for the goddess candle. The working candle is almost always white. A working candle is just a candle that is placed between the god and goddess candle and is used to light other candles or even your charcoal for your incense burner. What candles do you use and what colors for what? Let me know in the comments below. A bell. A lot of Wiccans and witches will use a bell to mark the different phases of a circle. The bell is also used to clear the air or negativity and dark vibrations. A besom. This is a magical broom. This is to be used magically, not to physically clean your circle area. In fact, a lot of practitioners will symbolically sweep with the besom, never letting the actual straw at the end touch the ground. This is usually utilized before any circle is cast and even before anyone steps foot in the circle area. A person will walk around the circle area, symbolically sweeping usually diesel, sunwise or clockwise, while they say a chant to symbolically cleanse the area of negativity and bad vibrations. Always store a besom bristle end up. So yes, witches do ride brooms, but only in symbolism and dance, just like our ancestors through the centuries. One thought is that witches would put hallucinogens on the end of the broom and then insert it into their orifice, if you know what I mean, causing them to then, in essence, trip balls and therefore fly. Some would also place ointment under their arms, buttocks, genitals, pulse points, etc., so that the ointment could seep in through their pores. At this point, they would then sit before a fireplace to begin sweating, as to sweat the poison out and not be tripping all night long. Sort of a control or throttle for the trip experience. And they would do this as it was believed they could leave their bodies astrally and project to a celebration too far for them to journey at the time to celebrate with other witches or visit someone at a distance. A less graphic and extreme practice of riding broomsticks also involved our witchy ancestors straddling a broom like a hobby horse in the fields during the season before the harvest to symbolically, using sympathetic magic, they would jump astride these brooms, which are symbols of fertility, to show the crops how high to grow. The higher they danced and jumped, the more energy the farmers raised and the better harvest they would have at the harvest time. Another tool to have handy, a candle snuffer. You always want to snuff out your candles when you can. Never blow out a spell candle when you must put it out, as it is believed that you are blowing away the magic you just did. With the god and goddess and elemental candles, once you've said goodbye to them, it's okay to blow out the candles, but why not just keep things consistent and snuff them instead? Another handy item is a small box to keep some raw incense on your altar to throw on your charcoal in your censer as needed. Also, a small bowl with some salt in it and a small bowl with some water. With the bowls of water, salt, incense, and the censer, you now have all 4 elements on your altar ready to be utilized to cleanse and bless anything that may need so before or during ritual, including each other. Finally, imagery, something to represent your god and goddess. Whether it be specific statues, pictures in a frame, representations of your god and goddess, whatever you wish to represent them. Every Wiccan has a god and goddess. It's what makes Wicca a religion. Not every witch will have a god and goddess, but if you do have one, you should include them in your rites and give them proper representation. More for you than them. Alrighty, I think that just about wraps up this episode of Witch in the Working. Let me know of some of the tools you utilize in your circles below in the comments, or even if you have a comment or correction about anything I've mentioned in this video. Hell, I'm here to learn too. I just got more time to run my mouth than you do. So let me hear it. Please click the subscribe button and please share this channel with the other pagans and witchy peoples you know. And let's help spread the word. Hey guys and gals, thank you very much for watching and have an amazing rest of your week. Until the next episode, see you later.